where is that Pete post office thing? I wanted to talk about how he was going to go after the post office. Yeah, he's calling for the privatization of the post office, isn't he?
Wait, wasn't it something he did at McKinsey?
Oh, yeah, McKinsey. He was the one. Oh, yeah, now I remember. So he went in. Now, this is the backstory on the post office. The post office, up until 2006, was completely self-sufficient. It did not require any taxpayer monies whatsoever to function. It paid for itself through stamps. Now, there have been many attempts to expand what the post office does. The biggest one that people have talked about is to return to the days, and this happened back, I can't remember exactly when, it was about 100 years ago now. The post office used to do some small-time banking stuff. Not like big, loans or anything like that, but they would do small transactional banking. What does this allow people to do? Well, it allows them to go and take their check from work, and instead of going to a check cashing place and paying huge fees, it allows people to have an address and establish some type of banking services. It would allow people to escape all sorts of huge service fees. You could split the fees in half right at the beginning, and then all of a sudden the post office would be doing great. You've already got people there. Add a couple. They're already doing some fairly technical work in terms of transmitting materials all around the country. So there's all sorts of good reasons for this. Well, it turns out that Pete Buttigieg was part of the team that not only said to the post office, don't pursue banking like that. This is back in 2007. Remember, this is after they have now been subjected to an incredibly onerous obligation. Republicans said to the post office, because what's the Republican agenda? We want to privatize the post office. We want to let our donors at FedEx or UPS get a hold of all the best routes. We want to privatize this thing. And so what they did is they said, you must pre-fund your health insurance 75 years into the future. You must have an account to pay for that for 75 years in the future. Now, that's absurd. No business, no government agency does that. To pre-fund retirement benefits. This 2006 law basically now is responsible for the $150 billion debt that the post office had. If you were to get rid of that pre-funding requirement, they'd be basically, again, operating at a wash. But Congress doesn't allow them to raise the rates on stamps. They don't have the ability to do this. And apparently, in working for McKinsey, Pete, this is their the Buttigieg statement. Buttigieg apparently worked on a report drawing on suggestions from McKinsey and two other consulting groups. It was critical of the revenue-raising ideas that were supported by union workers, like basically providing some financial services through the post office, saying that they would be limited by so-called high operating costs and relatively light customer traffic of post offices compared with commercial retailers. I don't even know what that means. But, and apparently gave they implemented a number of the recommendations from this report, which involved cutting workers and just cutting stuff, essentially. The Postal Service, in response to this report, closed 141 processing plants in 2012 and 2013. And a 2018 audit from the Postal Service's regulatory body found the decision only reaped 5% of the savings that the consultants projected it would. In other words, it was 95% short of its goal. McKinsey's proposals also included cut costs by established public-private partnerships, replaced unionized postal service workers with staff at retail stores like Staples. Now, fortunately, under the Obama administration National Labor Relations Board, it ruled it in violation of the collective bargaining agreement between the Postal Union and the USPS. Mark Dimenstein, the president of the American Postal Workers Union, said any objective observer would have to say the McKinsey report had a real and negative impact. Look, the bottom line is that
you don't mess with the Postal Service.
Well, but there's a broader bottom line, but that's true too. It's one thing to go into McKinsey. You know, you get out of college, you get a job offer there. Maybe for 6 months later, you realize, like, this is not the place for me. But if you are found to fit in with that culture, there are certain ideological predispositions that you have to have. And one of them is the way to achieve profitability, the way that just the response to everything. Like with the Republicans, it's cut taxes. With these people, it is cut workers benefits, cut union workers. Close services. Rather than to see projects and be ambitious and about expanding the services to the public good, they look at everything as if it's a business. And government is not a business. Government is not a business. Government does not have to provide profits. And that, whatever that profit margin is, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 50%. That is what undercuts the services you get no matter where it is. Whether it's waiting for buses to get people out of New Orleans, Hurricane Katrina, but you've privatized it and you've subcontracted it out. Everybody's holding the buses back because if they're wrong and they send them and they're not needed, they're going to lose money. And with the post office, the bottom line is, look, if you're not worried about your other clients, if you don't have the predisposition, and not even clients that you necessarily have, but just like business, if you're worried that by adding financial services to the postal office, you're going to cut into other businesses. And if you cut into other business, somehow that's going to impact your business. If that is your predisposition, if you are worried about the private health insurance industry and you're willing to trade off the ability of everyone in the country to get health insurance and to get more comprehensive health coverage and ultimately more comprehensive health care, and to do so in a way that doesn't tax, and I mean tax in terms of like mentally, people. If you don't want to do that because you're afraid of private insurance going away, that's the predisposition you have. And your value system is it's specific. Other people can decide if that's the value system they want. But the idea of like, there's no inherent good in saving private health insurance. And that's the problem with Pete Buttigieg. I mean, that and the fact that he can turn on a dime, apparently, what's relevant to him. I mean, that is...
I'd be surprised to see him pivot back at this point.
I think that's unlikely. But that was a pretty hard pivot. And I don't even know if I would call it a pivot, because a pivot, you actually got to keep one foot on the floor. Right?
It's more of a...
It's a full-on travel. It's like a hop, a jump, and a skip is what it is. He took.
The TSA has several postal banking initiatives going on, by the way, including one right here in New York City, if anyone wants to get involved.
We were close at one point. Of course, under the Obama administration, they didn't do it. There was a big recommendations thing that happened, I think, about 5 years ago.
They came very close to passing it in California.
Real shame.
During the last midterm election.
Through line to Buttigieg's housing and gentrification policies.
I mean, I think it's indicative of everything, probably. I mean,
well, very
more or less.
specifically when he said, there's an old interview of him talking about viewing his job like, I'm going to paraphrase, but something like South Bend is an incubator. It's a startup.
Well,
no, it's full neoliberalism. He thinks about everything in the language of the market.
I will tell you this. The other problem with Pete Buttigieg, as I found out from an interview I did yesterday for Ring of Fire Radio, it'll play this weekend, with John Larson, who is a reporter with TYT.
He's the Buttigieg reporter.
It's
the Buttigieg reporter.
It's stunning. But Larson outlined to me there are three major potential sort of like ticking time bombs when it comes to Buttigieg. Largely all regarding race in South Bend. One is a federal civil rights case that has been brought by the family of a black man who was shot by a South Bend cop just, months ago. Supposedly the guy had a knife. And it's getting to be clear that that's probably not the case. But the family is bringing a case that is arguing there has been an ongoing racial problem in South Bend in terms of the way the policing and in the way that just the accountability across the board. And that could shake up a lot of different things under Buttigieg. There was also it has become clear that, I don't want to get too deep into the story. You can listen to the Ring of Fire interview with John Larson. You can find it on our YouTube channel. But there was a black lieutenant, and the first chief of police that Buttigieg hired, the non-temporary one, came from, I think it was New Bedford, had not a particularly good record on race. The lieutenant, they were at a meeting together. The chief steps out. The lieutenant hears there's a problem outside, goes outside, confronts a guy with a gun or a weapon. I'm not 100% sure exactly. I can't remember. But the story was that the lieutenant felt like the chief, when he came back in, did not come and back him up. Well, the Buttigieg administration tried to keep it under wraps, but the chief pursued it, sought investigations. Ultimately, it goes to the Indiana State Police. They do an investigation. Buttigieg says, I've seen the investigation. It basically says completely exonerates the chief from any wrongdoing. I mean, it wasn't a criminal investigation. It was just sort of like a behavioral one. Turns out Larson gets a hold of the report, and it does not say anything of what it says. The opposite of what Buttigieg says it was.
Buttigieg campaign officials are saying that a problem in South Bend is that African Americans don't like to be discriminated against because Buttigieg is gay.
That is not. But folks should check out that interview. The Buttigieg has a lot of problems, both in terms of like electoral problems. I think that like a weird history of being very, very happy to go along with. I'm not saying that Buttigieg is racist. I think that Buttigieg just is not someone who is willing to stick up for anything that in any ways does not show him the path to the least resistance of his success.
That's the McKinsey spirit.
I believe he doesn't think that
that's actually
racist.
The motto, right?
But you could still do some pretty racist things.
Hey, speaking of